Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 803, Wednesday, June the 5th, 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, it's Wednesday. That is the day, of course, that I'll be taking out the trash and having me some chicken. Every Wednesday. Taking out the trash and having some chicken. Now, let's get to the news of the day. Well, last night on a segment of Sean Hannity, he said that he has a source telling him that William Barr, has been given the IG report by Huckleberry Horowitz, and that the release is coming soon. Okay, so, yes, I guess Hannity's got some sources, and that may be true. Barr may have the report, but that's about the only person I've heard really reporting that. And there's still some things out there that I think Horowitz would like to have now that the declassification has happened. I don't know if this is for the final release or if this is for Barr to review it, but it seems to me that there's still some information that Horowitz has not been able to get that he can now get because of two things. Number one, the declassification, and number two, the story that Steele has decided he is going to talk to Horowitz's investigators. So those two things make me think that there might still be something left for Horowitz to explore, but that doesn't mean he can't release the report now, and then if new information comes out, then it comes out. But so I don't know, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Hey, if the Horowitz report comes out in the next day or two or three or next week, that's great. But there's still a lot more that needs to be learned, and of course we know that Horowitz is limited in his scope of who he can interview, and we know that they've been hiding documents from him at the DOJ, NSD, the CIA, and the FBI have all been hiding documents from Huckleberry Horowitz. He's not been able to interview any witnesses unless they still work at the FBI or DOJ. So all these high-level perpetrators and foreign overseas assets and spies and things and such, he's not been able to interview these people, which is why you need AG Barr and his U.S. attorney who can interview people outside the FBI, DOJ. So, we'll stay tuned and see what happens there. It's all good. Let the Horowitz report come out. I'm not expecting this big, huge bombshell that everyone else is talking about. I think Horowitz is certainly going to point out the strange way that this investigation was carried out, not typical of the way things are done. I think he's going to point out a lot of, things that were done that probably shouldn't have been done in this type of thing. The same thing we got from Horowitz before. But this is not going to be... the Horowitz report may serve as a springboard for AG Barr to justify a more aggressive investigation. It may provide basic evidence for the current investigation to be used when you interview these other people to try to corroborate what Horowitz has been told to determine if he was given truths or lies. So there is some benefit certainly to the Horowitz report coming out, but it's not the end-all be-all or anything like that. It is a stepping stone to getting to the real investigation and a real conclusion to this crime, and that would include the indictments and so forth that go along with completing an investigation like this. So, yeah, let's see what happens. Now, as I just mentioned, the London Financial Times is reporting that Steele will cooperate and talk to U.S. investigators associated with the Horowitz investigation. Apparently, this meeting is going to occur in London sometime in the next couple of weeks. Apparently, though, Steele is saying that he will only talk to the Horowitz investigation only on a limited scope in discussions about the dossier and the FBI. And that's all he's really wanting to talk about. So it's like Steele trying to set his terms. He can go ahead and do that, but ultimately, Mr. Huber, or Mr. Durham, not Mr. Huber, Mr. Durham, ultimately, Steele's a key player. Durham cannot complete his investigation without interviewing Steele, and he doesn't want any limits on anything that he asks Steele. And Steele, of course, as we know last week, said he would not cooperate with Durham's investigation. So he may be saying that, but believe me, Durham will simply go ahead and say, okay, that's fine, we'll get back to him later. And they'll go ahead and collect all the other evidence they have, and then at some point they'll have enough evidence to show that Christopher Steele could be tied to a conspiracy to sabotage the presidential campaign, lie to the FBI, various other crimes that he can probably list, in which point Mr. Durham will go to Steele's attorneys and say, and to the British government, probably with a writ or a decree for an order saying that they are going to charge or indict Christopher Steele, at which point the British government will certainly cooperate. They're not going to fight us on that, for an extradition of Steele, or they'll take him down right there in London. Ultimately, Steele is going to testify in front of a grand jury or to Mr. Durham, and he will not be deciding what questions get asked and do not get asked. The only thing he can do right now is try to throw a wrench in the spokes, delay, and that sort of thing. Ultimately, Durham has to have an in-depth Q&A with Steele, and he will. He will eventually have Steele in that position. Now, Steele may decide at that point he's not going to cooperate, in which case Durham can just go ahead and indict Steele and have him extradited, in which case Steele can sit, in jail until he decides to talk, or maybe he can make bail or something like that. It'll probably be a high bail, at which point, if he doesn't talk, then he'll be considered one of the conspirators who will likely be charged, or he can decide to cooperate and become a witness. He's going to have to make a decision at some point. Now, Christopher Steele, should be noted that the British government has been contacted about whether or not they are going to try to prevent Steele from being interviewed or anything like that. And apparently the British government has stated through their public relations that Christopher Steele is a private citizen. He no longer works for British intelligence. He left there in 2007 or 09, either 07 or 09. So as far as the British government is concerned, Christopher Steele's problems are Christopher Steele's problems. They're not going to defend him or anything like that. He doesn't work for them anymore. He's a former employee. And so it doesn't sound like the British government at this point is interested in defending Steele. And let's face it, if the British government has to throw Steele to the wolves in order to preserve their relationship with the Trump administration, that's certainly what they will do. They have necessarily no love for Christopher Steele. He's put them in a hell of a pickle. And so, I mean, the relationship between the British government and the Trump administration is much more important than protecting Christopher Steele. I mean, the jig is already up. Trump knows what happened. Most Americans know what happened. Most Brits know what happened. The Attorney General and his U.S. Attorney are investigating it. They're going to figure out everything that happened. The British government knows this. They're not stupid. They're not going to get caught blindsided or like a deer in the headlights or anything like that. They're definitely already making moves. We saw that this began back in 2017 when we learned that they passed a memo to the Flynn team and also a memo to the DOJ letting them know that they did not necessarily agree that Steele's information was reliable or that he was reliable. So it doesn't look like to me that the British government is preparing to defend Steele, because Steele's original reason for before he would agree to testify to Horowitz's people was, well, you have to check with the British government too. They have to make sure it's okay. And that's exactly what Huber's team, IG Horowitz's team did. They contacted the British government, and the PR people there said, we don't care. I mean, Steele's a private citizen. I mean, his business was with the Hillary Clinton team, the Fusion GPS folks, the FBI, and all these other people. We didn't have anything to do with that. Now, we know that that's not altogether true, because we know from the Kathleen Kvalik memo where she said Christopher Steele told her that he did brief this JIC, this Joint Intelligence Committee. And we also know that that would have included Gina Haspel would have been involved in those meetings. We know that Christopher Steele personally had conversations and briefings and talked to the former head of British intelligence, who's now retired. We also know that he has a close relationship with Mr. Hannigan, Robert Hannigan of the GCHQ, who came here personally on at least once occasion to the U.S. to meet with Brennan in the summer of 2016. So there's no question that Christopher Steele had been had been having meetings with official British intelligence officials. So the British government can try to downplay that, and maybe that's the card they're going to play is, hey, we'll give you Steele. But try to preserve the integrity of our intelligence services at the same time. We want to disassociate ourselves with Steele. You can have Steele, but try to leave our official intelligence people and official agencies out of this, or clean as possible. And I think that that's probably where the British are going to come down on this. They're probably going to serve up Steele in order to protect their official assets. That would be my guess. Ultimately, Christopher Steele is in the same boat that all the other perps are in. Who's going to give up who? Who is going to fall on the sword for who? Is Christopher Steele going to fall on the sword for the FBI, for the Obama administration, for the Hillary Clinton campaign? I don't think so. I don't think so. When it comes right down to it, and they're actually looking at jail time and fines, and they're seeing people being indicted, that's when people like Christy Steele are going to sing. They're ultimately going to try to cover their own butt. That's what everybody does. Who wouldn't? So that's my thoughts on that. But at least ways, we can see that now Christopher Steele has agreed to speak to Horowitz's people, but he knows Horowitz's people can't indict him. But what they learn from Christopher Steele will certainly be made available to Durham, and ultimately, whatever Steele gives to Horowitz is going to go to Durham, and it's only going to present Durham with more questions for Steele, and he eventually will be able to ask those questions. Steele can ultimately decide to plead the fifth. That's fine, in which case he'll just go into the column of people to be indicted, one way or another. So it's up to Christy Steele. My suggestion was a long time ago that he should come clean. Come clean. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on from that into the next segue to the next thing, which still involves Steele, which is that we are now looking at a potential spy versus spy situation, kind of like Mad Magazine. Spy versus spy. Because the FBI officials up to this point have testified under oath that they did not know that Steele was shopping the dossier to the media, and that Steele never told them that. Keep that in mind. This is what FBI officials have stated. FBI officials, and this includes their investigators, the same ones that were on the Mueller team, have testified that they did not know that Christopher Steele was shopping the dossier to the media, and that Steele never told them. Well, that's simply impossible to believe. It's impossible to believe that the FBI couldn't know that Steele was all over Washington, D.C. He was openly speaking to reporters, groups of reporters. Glenn Simpson set up 2 meetings where he briefed groups of reporters. He certainly was speaking to Bruce Orr. Bruce Orr was quite aware of the fact that Steele was speaking to reporters, and he was the one relating directly to the FBI. He personally had a meeting with McCabe and told him all about it. Clearly, the FBI is lying. Glenn Simpson and Steele have both testified to the exact opposite of what the FBI says. Both Simpson and Steele say the FBI was fully aware that Steele was shopping the dossier to media outlets. And who were these lying FBI agents? Well, these are the same FBI agents who were working on Operation Crossfire Hurricane until the Mueller was appointed special counsel. Then they moved over to the Mueller team. It's the same guys. That's why I say when someone says, "Oh, there might be 3, 4, 5 indictments," no, there's going to be dozens, 2 to 3 dozen minimum indictments. There's 40 FBI agents that were working on this as it was Operation Crossfire Hurricane. How about the ones that arrested Papagalopoulos and what they did and what they said? And these same FBI agents are the same ones that went to work for the Mueller team. And they're the ones that lied and said that they didn't know that Steele was shopping this to the media. There's just no way that's possible. Now, if you remember, Chuck Grassley wrote that letter to the FBI asking them to investigate, because he said, in fact, he actually gave a speech on the Senate floor. Then he, after writing the letter, he said, somebody's lying. Because we interviewed Glenn Simpson, and he said the FBI knew Steele was shopping the dossier to the media. But when they interviewed government officials and FBI investigators, they said, no, we had no idea that that's what Steele was doing. Somebody's lying, and Grassley believes it is the FBI. And in this case, I agree. I agree. Certainly. It's nearly impossible to believe the FBI wouldn't know that Steele was in D.C. Briefing gobs of reporters. It's just not believable. So basically what we have here, again, that's a case of spy versus spy, and we'll just have to see who gets unraveled here. I think it's going to be all of them, because they're all lying about a lot of things. Let's move on to some other news. I think we'll get back to a little bit more on that subject in a minute, but I guess most of you have heard by now that this former Broward County Deputy Sheriff, Scott Peterson, has been formally charged with 7 counts of child neglect, 3 counts of culpable negligence, and 1 count of perjury. He was the cop who was the school resource officer who was on duty in 2018 at the school shooting in Broward County, Florida. Of course, he was there, but he did nothing. Nothing. And I'm surprised it took this long, and I'm surprised that the sheriff has avoided scrutiny along with other officers who arrived on the scene and just never really went in. I mean, they literally got there. There's probably a half a dozen of them from Broward County, the sheriffs, in addition to the school resource officer, and they basically took up positions outside their cars and took cover. They didn't attempt to even go into the school. I mean, this is just not what you do. I mean, it's not explainable. So someone gave an order. I mean, certainly not all those cops were total cowards. At least a couple of them had to think, man, we got to get in that school. That's the only thing on my mind. If it was me, even if I wasn't a cop, if I had a gun, or even if I didn't have a gun, I'd probably be like, man, somebody's got to do something. You know, here's these cops. I mean, they got semi-auto weapons. Half a dozen sheriffs. They arrive on the scene. They take up a position outside the school. I mean, come on, man. I mean, this is not even, it's not even close. Completely untrained citizens who had a couple of guns wouldn't have done that. They would have gone into the school and said, man, somebody's shooting there. Let's go find out where the shooting is coming from. Let's do something, you know. This school resource officer, Scott Peterson, he certainly was armed. He could have gotten some shots off. He certainly could have at least ways, at the very least, even if he couldn't take the shooter out, just returning fire on the shooter would have probably caused the shooter to get out of there or shoot himself or do something. It certainly would have kept him from shooting at more of the students. He would have returned fire on Peterson. And if Peterson had taken up a good defensive firing position with a little bit of cover, he could have at least ways kept the shooter at bay until he got some assistance. I mean, he's got the little radio right there, you know. He could have started returning fire and calling in for backup. I'm here. I'm in the school. I'm at this point. I'm engaged with the shooter right now. Need backup. None of this happened. What a disgrace. 17 people killed, 17 wounded. Yes, the son of a bitch needs to be indicted. Should have happened a long time ago, and it should have been more than just him. Hopefully there'll be more charges coming. That sheriff, what's his name, Scott Israel, that son of a bitch should also be, he should certainly never have a job as a sheriff or be any way involved in law enforcement ever again. And he needs to explain who directed those officers, the half a dozen or so who arrived at the school shortly after the shooting, to take up positions outside the school. I mean, that was, I don't know who gave that order, but that's as close to a stand-down order as you can get. That's the exact opposite of what you would be trained to do under these circumstances. It's there's a lot more that needs to be looked at here. Well, I suggested yesterday that maybe Trump and Nigel Farage would have a chance to talk in London, and as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. Farage was able to attend the dinner last evening at the ambassador's house in London. So I'm sure that was a lot of fun for both Trump and Farage. Let's see. Well, we have Megan Magoo. Remember, we talked about the comment that she made on The View a couple of days ago, where she's suggesting the Democrats should take the kill shot at Trump. And since making that comment, she has not been back on The View. She has not been back on The View. Megan Magoo should never be back on The View or any other program for that matter. She should get a visit from the Secret Service is what she should get. She knew exactly what she was saying. And like I said, when I first commented on this story, there's a lot more to learn about Magoo's dealings in the Spygate. He was very instrumental in it. The reason why it was important for him to be the one to pass the dossier on to Comey is that they needed someone of his stature to be a source for the dossier because Steele was such a flimsy source. They needed someone that they could say, hey, it was the Honorable Senator John McCain who passed that dossier on to Comey, to give it more credibility, because Steele's was shot by that point. By January of 2017, Steele's credibility was completely shot. So that's when they had to turn to Magoo, and he was happy to oblige. We also know that Magoo's right-hand man, David Kramer, was the one who passed the dossier onto BuzzFeed, which allowed them to publish it. We also know that David Kramer, Magoo's right-hand man, was over in Ukraine, rubbing elbows with Alexandria Chalupa and those corrupt officials, probably some of the corrupt FBI agents. This guy was in this all the way up to his elbows, my friends. Senator Magoo and his role in all this will be more exposed when we get to the bottom of this particular barrel of stinking fish. And there's no stinkier fish than Senator Magoo and that heifered offspring, Megan Magoo. Are we looking at the end for Rachel Mad Cow? Are we looking at the end of the career of Rachel Mad Cow? Since the Mueller report came out, Mad Cow has lost 500,000 viewers. 500,000 viewers since the Mueller report came out. The New York Times this past week advised their reporters not to go on the Mad Cow show because it's so bad. CNN lost over 16% of their viewers last month, in addition to losing 26% the previous month after the Mueller report came out. That's a combined 42% of their viewers just since the Mueller report came out. Almost everybody on CNN is bleeding viewers. I mean, Como was down to like 550,000. I mean, there's YouTubers that get 10 times that. I don't know how they're staying on the air. Well, I mean, I know how they're staying on the air. They don't care if they lose money. They're losing billions of dollars. Certainly tens of millions. Anyway, I don't know billions, but they're losing tens of millions of dollars. Because they pay those people a hell of a lot of money. I mean, Mad Cow makes serious money. I mean, multi-million-dollar contracts. These are $20, $30 million a year people. Como making well over in the millions of dollars. All these people making over $1 million that you see on CNN. Many of them making in the $10, $20 million range. There's no way they can afford to pay those salaries. You can't, in the media business, you have to be able to justify your salary. If they're paying you $20 million a year, that means you got to be bringing in at least, that much in advertising revenues during your show. If you're not, you're generally out of there. There's no way that they can afford to continue to pay Mad Cow. Maybe she'll take a major pay cut. That's the only way she'll be on the air. She's on her way out. Her career is destroyed. And as soon as the Spygate story is completely unraveled, that will be the end of many, many of these careers of these fake news journalists. Their careers will be over. Literally, they'll be destroyed. They missed the biggest story in American history while propagating a hoax. Not good if you're a reporter. The voices are now growing louder. Voices growing louder, wanting to know when they are going to put Obama under oath, to have him answer some questions, to find out what he knew and when he knew it. Typically, the fish like Obama, you don't go in for an Obama fish until you got every bit of information you can get. When you go for the top dog, you better have everything. You can't go interview the top dog and let him wiggle off the hook. And that's exactly what happens if you go for him too early. You don't go for the top dog until you've got everything else. He'll be the last person they interview, but he will be interviewed. They have to interview Obama. There's no way you can not. Once they unravel this entire plot, it'll be impossible not to interview Obama. We know that Obama from, well, first of all, I mean, it's common sense. And Barr and anyone else who investigates this figure this out in about 9 seconds. Doesn't take you long. You cannot get FISA warrants on people at this high a level, particularly the person running for president in the opposing party. You cannot get FISA warrants on them and their team and people around them, national security letters, without the president knowing about it. Nobody in his cabinet would do that. It would be sabotaging the president. You don't do that kind of stuff behind his back. Obama had to know and had to give at least tacit approval. You do not run these types of operations without the president knowing. This is not plausible. Obama will have no plausible deniability because of the size and scope of the crime and because of the fact that the people who are carrying it out were the highest level people, including cabinet level officials. Obama cannot say he didn't know what was going on. It's just not going to work. We also have the text from Lisa Page telling us that Obama wants to know everything that's going on. The White House is running this. And there's probably many other texts that we have not even seen. So the idea that we're even questioning whether Obama knew, I mean, Obama knew probably everything. It was probably, along with the Right Reverend Clinton and John Brennan, directing it. Bill Binney says he did try to brief the Mueller team on why the DNC was not hacked. He was wanting to provide the evidence for that. The Mueller team showed no interest whatsoever in talking with Bill Binney. Binney has prepared a statement, though, for Roger Stone's attorneys that they will be using in court. Stone and his attorneys have filed a petition with the court to force the government to prove it was the Russians that did the hacking and to force CrowdStrike to turn over their data. This is another part of the story that is not going away. All the other parts of the story will probably all play themselves out. And then, once this has all played itself out, and we can see exactly what did happen, it's at that point that people will then start to go, so if all this was a ruse and a hoax, then what about this theory that if the Russians weren't involved in a plot, then did they really hack the DNC? And if they didn't, who did give that stuff to WikiLeaks? WikiLeaks says it didn't come from the Russians. It's only when we get to the end of that particular part of the investigation will people start to begin to ask questions, I think. I mean the right people. We've been asking the questions, but I mean the right people, like the Attorney General, his investigators, about what exactly did happen there. I think we'll eventually get there. Well, we're learning more about this story that's breaking big time in Italy. As we know, the current prime minister, who just won the elections there, fired the 6 top intelligence officials from 3 different agencies. The Italian papers are reporting that has something to do with Spygate. We received stories last week coming from the Italian press that Matteo Renzi was possibly part of that, and now he may be forced to resign as from his party as the party leader. There are rumors swirling around him that he may have been involved in the Spygate thing. We know about his close relationship with Obama and the meeting that they had in the summer of 2016, but we're also learning that Renzi is also very close to the Clintons. and that he is a donor to the Clintons. He also spoke at the Clinton Global Initiative Conference along with George Soros. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes right now. A lot of things are breaking down. A lot of things are breaking down, and that will continue. We had the former attorney for President Trump, John Dowd, on with, I believe it was Lou Dobbs the other night, and he says that the entire Mueller report is a fraud, and he's not really happy that Mueller left out or edited out a significant and important part of the conversation Dowd had with a cooperating attorney. I believe it was one of Manafort's attorneys or one of the attorneys representing someone else. I think it was Manafort, which is done all the time. Attorneys have these conversations all the time. Nothing was done there that was illegal, but when Mueller put it in his report, he edited out several paragraphs that were critical to understanding the context of the conversation to make Dowd look bad. And Dowd is pretty pissed about it, by the way, and I think that he may take legal action. But the Bar Association and possibly Attorney General Barr could take legal action against Mueller because as a special counsel, you are not permitted, or even a federal prosecutor or a U.S. attorney or a local, municipal court prosecutor in your local town. They're not allowed to leave out that purposely edit out and leave out that type of information. If they release a phone call like that, they have to release the whole thing. They can't pick and choose and sparse it out. That's not something you can do. That's another example of withholding or covering up what would be considered exculpatory information. It changes the narrative or the context of the conversation. That is against the law. That's breaking the law. That's not even just it's not an ethical violation with the Bar Association. It's actually a breaking the law. Mueller broke a lot of laws. And as I said many times before, I do believe that when we get to the bottom of this again, Uncle Bob the Executioner and his Hillary donor posse are going to be viewed as suspects, as a larger part of this conspiracy, of which they were key players. It's been 18 months since the Senate Judiciary Committee demanded answers from the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign about the Steele dossier. A letter was sent to the Clinton campaign by Chuck Grassley. That letter was 12 questions. We covered some of them here. There still has been no response. And thank goodness we finally have John Solomon now directing his reporting and investigation to Hillary. Hillary, thank God. Since very first week that I began doing TowerGate videos, I said this smells like a Clinton operation. I've been watching the Clintons for many years. This is exactly the type of schemes that the Clintons do. It was carried out the exact way that the Clintons always do it. They always use other people to do the dirty work so that they have plausible deniability, so that you'll know for a fact that they were absolutely tied to the criminals and the perpetrators who eventually usually get charged and go to jail, but the Clintons walk away scot-free because they're very, very clever at not leaving their fingerprints at the scene of the crime. But there was 12 questions, and I don't think we had them all, but I do remember reporting on this at the time, and I do remember one of the most important questions because it's one of the questions that I've had for a very long time that needs to be asked of the Rotten Reverend Clinton, which is, did you have any direct conversations with Christopher Steele, or anyone in your campaign have direct conversations with Christopher Steele? And did he relay to you any information that was in the dossier that would later find its way in the dossier, or information did he relay to you that was not found in the dossier? There was a lot of good questions there. They need to be asked of the Rotten Reverend Clinton, and then they need to be asked soon. So there's two things I've been harping on for a very, very long time, as most of you who watch my channel know. I've been talking about the secret task force set up by John Brennan and why that's important, because that's how they coordinated all of this. And of course the Rotten Reverend Clinton, because she planned, organized, directed, and controlled the operation. So these are the two people that you really have to get at, including Obama, to truly understand what happened here. And so thank God last week we actually had several stories talking about the John Brennan secret task force, and now we have John Solomon dialing in on the Rotten Reverend Clinton, the impetus of every bit of this. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. You guys have a good night. See ya. Bye.